Western philosophy, as it's usually taught, starts with Socrates badgering Euthyphro for a definition of piety, or the pious. What is the pious? Asks Socrates, and notoriously Euthyphro has difficulty answering. And then in the next book, Socrates badgers Meno for a definition of virtue. What is virtue? And Meno gives various examples and sort of runs the concept around a bit, but Socrates persists and says, no, that's all jolly interesting, but what is virtue? Give me the timeless essence of virtue. Give me the definition of virtue that will tell me what virtue really is. And that's a conception of philosophy that persists through the history of the discipline, one way and another. What is X? And when you ask what is X, you're asking for some sort of essence, a definition that will tell you what the thing is and why it is the way it is. Well, this isn't what Nietzsche's about, because Nietzsche says that only something with no history has a definition. In other words, the things we really care about, truth, justice, knowledge, morality, punishment, whatever you like, the important for the self, God, the important philosophical words, all have complex histories. And at any given moment, there might be several different meanings in play at the same time. There might be tensions between the different aspects. And that's because these sorts of concepts, they're always there for some practical purpose. And there's always somebody using it for some practical end of their own. So instead of looking for the essence of something, what we should do, says Nietzsche, is we should tell the story of how we got to where we are, how we came to have the concept of justice or knowledge or morality or whatever it is that we're currently interested in. And we should not expect that story to be to have just one thread. We should not expect that story to have just one thread. We should expect to find contradictory tendencies at work at any given moment. So what we mean by justice, for example, at any given moment might mean 2 or 3 different things, and we might move between them depending on what we're trying to achieve on any given occasion. And the way this history works is that different bodies with power and interest will take what they inherit and turn it to their own purposes. So let's suppose that, well, think about Henry II of England, right? Henry II of England inherits Anglo-Saxon legal institutions, and then he refashions them, partly because he may want to make better law, but also because he wants to be more secure on his throne, and he wants to gather the power of dispensing law more closely to the crown. So law gets revised and reformed and possibly improved and rigorized and made more standard, and all of these things we can think of as progress. But part of the point was to help consolidate Henry II's power on the throne. That kind of stuff is going on all the way through history. That's how these institutions evolve over time. So one thing you need to appreciate is that we do philosophy by interrogating our intuitions, right? So you've done this in 100 different seminars where the lecturer will present you with some kind of problem, some philosophical puzzle about time or metaphysics or the mind or whatever it is, maybe give you some puzzling thought experiment to confuse you about the people swapping bodies and where does the real person exist? Is it in the body that suffers, or is it in the mind that understands the suffering, or whatever, right? And you're supposed to think about these partly by having intuitions about them and then thinking about how those intuitions can be true. Well, says Nietzsche, you should be suspicious of the fact that you have intuitions at all. You should ask yourself where those intuitions come from before you start relying on them as a source of philosophical information. You should ask yourself, where did they come from and what role do they play in your philosophical practice? And to try and bolster this point a bit, let me tell you a little story about German philosophical ethics. So there's Kant in Königsberg in East Prussia, as was. And he's thinking about ethics, about morality, and he decides that what he's going to do is to derive the one true objective morality from pure reason. So he sets up the tests, which I'm sure you're familiar with. The three criteria for judging whether a maxim is a good moral rule or a morally acceptable rule. And he goes to work and he writes his book of ethics. And what does he find? He finds that pure reason, the absolutely objective operation of logic, pretty much, comes up with an ethical system and precise ethical judgments that are exactly what you would expect of a person of Kant's class and sex and place and time. It turns out that exactly that pure reason agrees precisely with what respectable bourgeois 18th century Prussians already thought. Isn't this a bit suspicious? Wouldn't it be more persuasive if it turned out that pure reason was able to make some judgments and show 18th century bourgeois Prussians that they were wrong about a few things? This brings to mind the American philosopher Richard Rorty's observation that a really professional philosopher can supply a rational basis for anything you like, right? So, Hegel takes this on and aims to show that actually we don't get our ethics out of pure reason. We get our ethics through a long historical process. But in the end, Hegel wants to show that the ethics that we currently have, we respectable middle-class Germans of the 1820s, is the correct ethics, that our ethical judgments have been forged by, in the smithy of history, and by the time we get to the 1820s, we're getting it right. Well, says Nietzsche, Hegel was right to be suspicious of Kant's procedure, but it's too optimistic to hope that we just get ethics right because we've been doing it for a long time. What we have to do is think about where those intuitions come from. Well, those intuitions are partly driven by our interests and also by the interests of those who've gone before us. But in any case, just because some bit of ethical feeling, some bit of moral conviction is deeply rooted, doesn't mean that it's true. All it means is that for someone at some point in the past, it was very useful. So one of the challenges that Nietzsche gives us is to be suspicious of our intuitions. That whenever we start doing philosophy and relying on our intuitions, if somebody says, what's your feeling about this? What intuitions do you have? Let's set about listing our intuitions and then devising a philosophical model in which our intuitions all turn out to be not just true, but profoundly true. That if philosophy is the activity of expressing and ordering and combining into a model intuitions which we already have, then it's not critical enough, because we need to think about, well, where did those intuitions come from? Why do we have them? How did we have them? So Nietzsche's challenge is a deep challenge for most of the philosophical projects, certainly most of the projects in philosophical ethics that you're ever likely to meet.